And three, two, one, and we're live. So you were involved in Insight and doing
Mm.
research into the downtown east side, and obviously that's kind of become a pillar and an example, and a lot of communities are arguing about it. But you were part of the research.
Yeah.
So can you tell us your thoughts and where you view all of this going? Because I hear in Chilliwack we want to bring a safe injection site and hope, but what did you find and what are your thoughts on how we're proceeding?
Well, again, when I got involved in that initially, I was like, "Wow, this is a really awful idea. What are you guys doing?" And that was, that was me being ignorant about what was actually happening down there. I quickly changed my mind once I actually started going down and studying the problem a bit more. I was kind of invited by Neil Boyd to just be a researcher on this project. I was a data gatherer, walking around like interviewing people, that sort of thing. So I think I was the fourth or fifth author on the publication. It's just a government report, but it was pretty. I mean, at the time, it was very topical and kind of exciting because I'd be going down on the SkyTrain, listening to the radio, like, or driving back and forth between Abbotsford and New West, listening to the radio, ready to go downtown to do this research. And Stephen Harper would come on the radio and start talking about how the supervised injection sites were terrible and it was like a moral failing in Canadian society and all this stuff. And then they'd be talking to Neil Boyd on the radio and he'd be like, well, our evidence suggests that these are a good thing. And, it was just weird to be in the middle of it. And, yeah, like I said, I went in thinking that it was probably not the best idea to be doing this, but, it's really people who haven't actually seen what happens down there shouldn't really be talking about, unless you've actually read a lot and you know what you're talking about. People, they think that it's some glamorous, like you walk in there and there's music playing and people dancing around and partying at the supervisor. It's not like that at all. It's actually kind of like a medical facility, and it's actually not a real nice. It's very clean, it's well lit, but it's not a good vibe. You can the struggle, you can feel it in the air, right? Like you can feel the heaviness and the sadness, really, like, because these people are not happy people for the most part. They aren't there like, ooh, let's have fun, I'm at the supervisor. It's not like going to a bar. And that, like, I've had a ton of students suggest that, even like surprisingly, even like 300 level students who should maybe know better. It's gotten better over the past couple of years. It's become much more accepted. But ooh, like when I would talk about it in class early on, even for a few years after that, people would be like, well, what do you think, drug use is okay? And I'm like, well, no. But this is an effort to solve a problem, and our problem was that we had rates of disease in that area that were going towards like undeveloped countries who are very poor. Rates of HIV and hepatitis and all these diseases that other people can get who aren't using drugs were rampant down there. I had to sign a risk waiver to even work on the research. I carried hand sanitizer around with me. This is 10 years before or 13 years before COVID happened. But hand sanitizer was like your thing. And, yeah, I mean, they are like, there's piles and piles of research from UBC that prove that these are something that we need, to deal with this problem. Uh, there's really not a lot of ways to deal with the problem. I mean, that's the problem. You can't just lock everyone up who uses drugs. It's never going to work. They get their drugs inside. You have to let them out after a while and they still have drug use problems. It just becomes a never-ending cycle. And so, part of the role of the supervised injection site is to attempt to make them more functional, because these people don't need to be sitting around getting just blasted all the time. Some of them go there and they do their thing. They have a little bit. Some of them have jobs and they go work, and then they go back, maybe when they have a break, and they do another hit, and then they can go work because they aren't going through withdrawals. And that's the thing that people don't understand about drug use. It starts off as a pleasurable thing a lot of times, but it turns into this thing where you keep doing it because you don't want to go through the pain of letting it go and going through the withdrawal symptoms.
That's so weird because alcohol is the worst, because a hangover is with your body withdrawing from alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
and it feels like no, like everybody's like, oh, how do I kick this hangover? And it's like, well, truthfully, to drink more would get rid of it because you're withdrawing from it. And we don't talk
Hair
like
of the dog,
again, we just let alcohol off the hook for having these consequences, and then we have like advertisements of like the hangover cure, and it's like, that's alcohol withdrawal cure, like that's what you're trying to do. Like, it's so weird we don't say it.
Yeah, well, and alcohol, I didn't know this till a few years ago, but I had a guest speaker come into my class, and she was accompanied by a emergency room nurse who deals with people who have drug issues all the time. And a lot of people don't know this, but you know what drug has by far the worst withdrawal symptoms?
Which?
Alcohol.
Yeah.
You can die. You can die if you don't wean yourself. She can't even tell people you need to quit. They can be severe alcoholics. And she said, I will never tell anyone to quit cold turkey because that is dangerous. You can go into shock, your body, you can just die. Yeah. That doesn't happen with heroin. Your body won't go into, you'll be in pain and you will feel like hell, but you're not going to just die. And yeah, I think it's something people don't realize. Alcohol is very dangerous and we give it a pass a lot of times. And it's too bad that we don't acknowledge at least that it is something that we need to, especially excessive, like regular alcohol use. I mean,
it's just so weird because like when I spend time with my friends and like more adult groups, it's like, it's a pressure thing. Like when I say, nah, I'm good, like I don't want a beer, I don't want this, it's like people are like, are you sure you don't want a glass of wine, you don't want this, you don't want, and it's like, I don't want none, like I'm good. And then they're like, oh, all right, I guess. And it's like, what am I doing?
Crude. No, and that will never change. And that's that's the issue. And it's partially because people feel more comfortable if they're drinking. People feel more comfortable if everyone around them is drinking. A lot of times it's interpreted as like, is there something wrong? Are you sad? Like, dude, what's wrong? Well, nothing. I just don't want to drink right now. Is that okay? Yeah. And it's a social thing, and you just don't see that with anything. I mean, maybe food kind of becomes like, if you aren't eating as much, you know what I mean? Like, oh, come on, eat some more food. Maybe, but like, yeah, there's no comparison. So it's strange that people don't think of it that way. That's one of the reasons why I'm fascinated with drug use. I grew up, it's one of the reasons why I talked about the adverse, I said I hadn't really dealt with a lot of adversity. I grew up with friends who didn't have dads, or they had dads who were drinking all the time, every night, like, and not like a few beers. We're talking 10 or 12 or more, maybe sometimes, maybe hard alcohol on top of that. Passing out, like in front of people, like in front of kids, right? And so it's just amazing that we don't acknowledge that it's more of a problem than it is. It seems like it gets swept under the rug a lot.
I completely agree. Yeah. So do you think that we need more supervised injection sites? And I guess I'll couple that with something interesting. I noticed I was working up in Hope, and there's like a lot of talk in their community about bringing in supervised injection sites. And one of the arguments was like, well, this will just, like, if we put it here, it will bring the criminal element. And to a certain extent, I think that is true, because if you think of a place like Agassiz, it's so unique because they have no social programs. Mm-hmm. They have like their Agassiz community services, and that's it. And they don't do, like, I don't think they do a ton of reaching out to the community. They have like no homeless population, and if it is, it's very small. And so I do think that if you put a supervised injection site in Agassiz, you would bring a criminal element to a place where they just don't have that. Mm-hmm. But in places like Chilliwack, it's like you've hit a population size where you would never put it in like Ryder Lake or a place in the middle of nowhere. You'd put it right in the community base. And I think that obviously makes sense. But that does encourage criminal elements and individuals who are addicted to drugs, mm-hmm. and who are stealing to come to that community. So I think that sometimes we don't want to admit the downsides of it. And mm-hmm. we want to say, well, like, of course a supervised injection site wouldn't bring people. And it's like, well, it will, because people using who want to get off are going to go there, and they might do other things within that vicinity, mm-hmm. and by block radius. And so I think that we've been a little bit on the dishonest side about the fact that that doesn't happen, because you can look at communities who have no social programs and they don't have a criminal element because there's no one there who's doing those things. And so I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on bringing more of them in, and how should we go about doing it, or how have you seen it done well?
I think I think you're right on a lot of points there. Before I say anything, we did study the one in the downtown east side, and we weren't finding any increases, but that's because those people are already there, and so it's more of a management thing. It could well turn out differently in different places. Definitely, no doubt about that. I do think there needs to be more, but I'm a little worried that we're thinking we can just solve the problem with the supervised injection sites now. That's what people, rather than doing something more. And that's why I said, I'm for drug decriminalization. I'm serious about it. I see no evidence that prohibition is working. The only argument you can make in favor of it is I have a moral problem with drug use, and that's why it should be illegal. That's my opinion. I've never seen it. I'm just trying to think of examples, and they're not coming to me. It just doesn't work. I mean, you can even look at like the U.S. I mean, in places where they have less social programming, they have more severe penalties for drug use. They often have worse problems with drugs, and there's a reason for that. People get stuck in that lifestyle and they can't get out of it, and then they're beat down by the system the whole time, and so that's a problem. So I think, great, let's do some supervised injection sites in a very measured way. Let's study them, see if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, just like we did in the downtown east side. I think it could be done anywhere. If we find they're attracting criminal elements, we need to figure out how to control some of that. There's things that we were talking about earlier with environmental criminology that could be applied with that to cut down on some of the things they might be doing. But I think that needs to be accompanied by a shift in our thinking, on a more kind of global scale, right? I think, people love to bring up Portugal all the time because Portugal has had really good success. They've decriminalized all drugs. They did it in 2001. I've looked at the data. It's pretty clear that it's working the way it's supposed to work, but we can't just assume Canada is Portugal. Canada is different from Portugal, and Portugal went through a kind of a shift there in society where as a society, they were wanting to take a different approach. And I think, that's going to be a slow process, but I think we have to do it eventually because, Portugal didn't just decriminalize drugs and magically it was fine. I think that's
something. They diverted the funding.
Yeah, they did all kinds of crazy stuff to get these people who had addiction problems away from their addictions, or to give them, to raise their self-esteem. Really, at the end of the day, a lot of these drug users, they've been beat down and they don't think they can do anything. And so, what Portugal did was they have a lot of social programs. They have a lot of, like getting people into art and physical activity and things like that try to take them away from their addiction a little bit. They had programs set up to get, they would go in and they'd make a deal with like a mechanic or something. They say, well, you employ this guy, he's got drug issues, but he does have skills to be a mechanic. Would you employ him for a year and see if it works out? We'll pay half his salary if you pay the other half. Will you try it? And, a lot of business owners are willing to take that kind of risk. So they instituted some of that stuff over there, and it seems to really have made a difference. It seems to be what you need to do. But I just think, right now, it's funny to hear people try to defend prohibition. It's like, I just don't see how you do it. I mean, look at what's happening. We have an overdose epidemic. Canada has some of the highest rates of young people using drugs in the world. Like, prior to legalization, Canada had the highest rate of young people using marijuana compared to all the other countries. Even the U.S., I think they were above the U.S. too. U.S. was quite high. Is that what prohibition was supposed to do? Was it supposed to make people use more drugs? I mean, since drug prohibition over the years, all it's given us is we've got drugs that are cheaper. We've got drugs that are now more powerful, right? Because that's part of what happens during prohibition. It's a again, going back to rational choice theory, you know, you can even relate it back to stuff that went on during alcohol prohibition. You know, if you're a user, let's say we're living during alcohol prohibition. If you're an alcohol user, what kind of alcohol are you going to go buy during alcohol prohibition? What are you going to drink?
What's the most concentrated kind called?
Like Everclear or something really strong with a high proof. Now, why are you going to do that?
Because you can only get a little bit of it.
Yeah, and you can hide it. You're not going to be running around with a 12-pack of beer when it's illegal, because you have all this illegal substance. Dealers aren't going to want to sit there with all this, alcohol that isn't easy to transport. And so when you prohibit something and you actually enforce the law, the drugs start to become stronger. And if you think about it, you can see this in every, just think about it for a second. Every type of drug. Okay, so let's go back to prohibition. What were the most popular types of drinks? Well, cocktails became very popular. Hard alcohol was very popular. Cider, beer, all that stuff, low alcohol percentage, not as popular anymore. Let's go for fentanyl and heroin. We start out with heroin. Eventually, we move up to fentanyl, and that becomes and
then carfentanol.
Yeah, and it just keeps going. You can see this with some of the designer drugs that are coming out now, synthetic sorts of drugs. Each generation gets more and more powerful. I mean, it's to the point now where it's like fentanyl. You can just throw stuff in, just a little bit, and it's enough for hundreds of people, right?
When police officers are in danger going into these buildings because a little speck of fentanyl in the air can impact them and their ability to operate, and they have to wear suits to try and protect themselves and masks.
Yeah. And so even if you want to talk about cannabis, look at what happened with cannabis, marijuana. We have something called butane hash oil. We have shatter, butter. I mean, this stuff is like sometimes 70, 80% THC. The most concentrated flower marijuana you're going to get is probably 30% maybe. I mean, there's probably something stronger, but it'd be extremely uncommon. And that's what it's gotten us. It's gotten us more concentrated drugs rather than doing what it was supposed to do. I mean, what's popular to, if you just think about alcohol now, what do people drink now?
No, mostly beer, I guess.
Right. Yeah. And it's almost the weakest form of alcohol you can buy. Yeah. Well, there's a reason for that, because it's enjoyable, right? You don't take a shot and it's done and you kind of feel funny afterwards. You can slowly drink a beer and it's an okay feeling, right? And so it works the same way with other drugs too. And I mean, this is all based on economic theories, right? There's an interesting theory. It wasn't developed for drugs. It was developed for basically products. It was called the Allen-Elkian theorem. Elkian-Allen theorem. And it suggests that it's an economic theory about what kind, that you're going to want to ship away your highest priced goods because you're going to make more money off of them, that sort of thing. And then someone applied it to prohibition. They came up with this iron law of prohibition, what's called. And basically the idea is that if you have prohibition, the law is enforced, you're going to end up with stronger and stronger drugs. And that's not what we want to happen. So, anyone who wants to defend prohibition has to deal with all that stuff. And I just don't see how you do it.
Well, and I'm so grateful to have someone who started on the other side of the spectrum and worked their way over to where you are now. It's like, it's perfect, because good research should be done by somebody who goes in with their bias and then comes out with the exact opposite of what they would have liked to have found. Like you've demonstrated, you've said, like, I had this position when I saw it, and now I'm way over here because of the evidence, and the evidence moved me from here to here. And I think the problem we run into with drugs is kind of the same one we run into with abortions, is nobody wants to promote more. But like, we're not like, go out, everybody go have one whenever you want. Like after you get a massage, go and like, that's not what we're doing. But it feels that way when we're saying it's okay. And that's where people have that reaction to drugs.